Can the immediate murder professionals take out the world's greatest superhero team, the Seven? My name is Umbra, and today we are here to answer that very question. Both of these groups of characters are actually quite simple to scale, and imps from a demonic realm are certainly something the verse has never seen before. Something that could also maybe excite Homelander. Can I.M.P survive and take out the world's greatest superhero team? Or is this simply a one-sided slaughter? Let's find out. Let's start with the Seven. And for this, we will be using the Seven from Season 2 of The Boys, where I would say that the Seven is at their strongest. Let's get to the speed stuff first. Now, there's a lot of contention with the speed tiering in The Boys, with A-Train sort of stated to be the fastest, at least seemingly in terms of his travel speed, with his top speed, while amped, being around the speed of sound. However, Homelander has shown to be much faster than this, reaching hypersonic speeds, and even massively hypersonic if you consider statements such as him going into space and reaching escape velocity. There's also him outspeeding an explosion with both Butcher and Stillware's child, with this feat calculated to be around Mach 18 or hypersonic plus, if we're going with consistent speed ends. Now, even though Homelander himself does reach this speeds, very few other characters in The Boys actually scale to this speed, and that includes other members of the Seven. As said before, even though A-Train is sort of stated to be the fastest, clearly he doesn't have the feats or really even the scaling to say that he would scale to any of these hypersonic speeds. I will come back to this in a bit. Back to Homelander, the only one who really seems to compare to him in speed, at least in terms of members of the Seven, are Queen Maeve. Maeve can trade blows with Homelander and react to his punches. However, lesser characters like the Deep, Starlight, who compare to A-Train, and likely Black Noir would also compare to the speed, also meaning that they don't currently scale to the hypersonic plus speeds that Queen Maeve and Homelander do. Now, there are a couple of statements to get the speed scaling a little bit higher, being those describing Homelander's heat vision as being lasers, and Starlight's power involving light, which would give them relativistic to potentially FTL speed scaling. However, it is pretty contentious with all the previously established speed stuff, especially with A-Train, who has an established top speed, and was even shown to dodge Starlight's light attacks. It seems quite inconsistent though. A-Train was amped during this scene, so it wouldn't even scale to his base. Now let's go to their attack potency. Let's start with the man himself, Homelander. Now, Homelander gets the benefit of the doubt of, being the strongest, meaning any other feat that anyone below him or weaker than him has done, he would just upscale. He would upscale Queen Maeve's feat of surviving Soldier Boy's explosion, which, when calculated, would be around a city block level feat. Homelander being above city block level is pretty consistent due to the fact that he can survive a city block level explosion from a chemical plant. However, we can even get him even higher based off of a storm feat done by Nubia, who generated a thunderstorm which would equate to around large town level. Now, there are some higher ends for Homelander, with statements such as him being able to survive any man-made weapon, which would include things like nuclear bombs. And it was even suggested in Season 3 that only a hydrogen bomb would, or at least something compared to it, would be needed to have taken out Soldier Boy, who Homelander is stronger than. However, this seems somewhat inconsistent with all the previous scaling, and considering he's been hurt by characters who are weaker than him, it seems like a pretty big jump in power. Not only that, but even if Homelander was holding back against Maeve, something like durability isn't really something you can just, hold back or control unless you have specific powers that, can do that sort of thing, which Homelander for sure does not have. So the city level stuff is pretty inconsistent. However, Homelander would still be as low as city block level to large town level. Now back to Maeve. She is shown to be physically superior to both Stormfront and Black Noir. Black Noir in particular was able to withstand a version of the explosion that Homelander was able to survive, with this being equated to around large building level, so this further supports Maeve being around city block level. Now, Stormfront kind of falls in the middle of the two of them. She gets beaten pretty nicely by Maeve in the beginning of the fight. Granted, both Kimiko and Starlight were there too. However, Stormfront held the upper hand in that fight, at least until Maeve showed up. Now, the last 3 members of the 7 actually all compare to each other pretty nicely, with the Deep showing surprising showcases of strength of being on par with Starlight, with both the Deep and A-Train being physically relative to each other. However, in terms of their attack potency, we jump back to Black Noir, who when fighting the Soup Terrorist, stayed in place despite an explosion that the Soup Terrorist had caused. Even though he was damaged, he still endured the forces of the explosion, with this being calculated to be in the small building level ranges of power. Why is this important? Well, Starlight with her light attacks was able to use them to push back Black Noir, despite him previously being able to endure a small building level explosion. So her falling into the small building level tier seems pretty fair. This would mean that the Deep and A-Train would fall into this tier as well. Wow, we really breezed through that one now, did we? The scaling for the boys verse has been covered a lot, and it's also pretty straightforward. So, yeah, but what about I.M.P? How do they compare against such a powerful team of superheroes? Now, I.M.P has some pretty interesting scaling. At their lowest, they've been bested by human beings, as far back as the first episode. However, if we are taking them at their peak, in both their strength and durability, they're actually fairly strong. In terms of their durability, they were able to survive a large building level explosion, granted minimally injured and nearly knocked out, but relatively unscathed nonetheless. And from there, they're pretty on par with each other in terms of attack potency as well. Blitzo, Millie, and Moxxie can take on opponents stronger than them too, such as Stryker. Stryker, who can fight both Millie and Moxxie at the same time, and also hurt them pretty badly. Blitzo is a bit more comparable to Stryker, although he did call Loona for backup in their first encounter, instead of taking Stryker physically on himself. And speaking of Loona, while she wasn't part of the large building level explosion, she has still shown that she is still relative and comparable to the rest of I.M.P, with even being able to hurt Blitzo pretty badly, further solidifying that she too would fall into this large building level tier, in terms of their attack potency and durability. Now there is another feat that I should definitely mention, and for that we will turn our attention to episode 3 of Helluva Boss, where a giant mutated fish raises a water column just by appearing, with this column of water being calculated to exerting small town levels of force. And Millie was able to kill the monster and even pry open its jaws. So if we're going by this would actually give I.M.P some small town level scaling. However, you could argue that this is an outlier, especially since it's inconsistent with the large building level stuff that was previously mentioned. I mean, I guess it could be used at a higher end, but personally, I'm a bit iffy on it. Okay, but what about speed? As speed, they would be as low as supersonic to even hypersonic speeds, considering the fact that Moxxie can react to a sniper rifle being fired. However, we could also use a certain feat from their fights with RoboFizz. RoboFizz, who managed to dodge all of Blitzo's bullets, and even catch them in his mouth at one point, with this speed being calculated to be in the hypersonic plus tier of speed. And once again, I.M.P are pretty relative to each other in terms of their attack potency, durability, and speed. They do have their respective differences though, such as Millie having incredible lifting strength, Loona having overwhelming physical strength as well, She is fairly agile in both human and hellhound form, Blitzo being able to contend with Striker physically. And while physically the weakest out of the I.M.P, Moxxie has displayed exceptional marksmanship. They also have a resistance to fire. And, well, that's about it currently. Overall, pretty decent packages in terms of their scaling. And the series is still going, so we are bound to get more feats. Now, before we get into who I think would win, I would like to disclaim that this is just one person's interpretation of a hypothetical fight between these two groups of characters. You are more than welcome to disagree with me. My word doesn't have to be the end-all be-all. Feel free to give your own interpretation of the fight in the comments. Now, with that being said, who do I think would win? And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, it's honestly pretty close. Somewhat. Let me explain. I could easily see I.M.P taking out some of the weaker members of the Seven. Characters like Starlight, the Deep, and A-Train are getting tossed around and basically one-shotted. Their best scaling really comes from just basic wall level stuff and small building level stuff too. And while that isn't too bad, they're dealing with characters who scale to building to large building already. Not only that, but they're at a big speed disadvantage. So they're not really going to be doing anything in the fight, just blitzed and potentially one-shot. And while Black Noir does display similar attack potency to I.M.P, he's definitely much too slow to do anything about it. And Stormfront isn't really going to be doing anything either. She may be a lot faster than the characters previously mentioned, although not fast enough. Although she does have an attack via her plasma bolts that could stun them. However, she seems to lack the potency and speed to really do any lasting damage. So it's really down to just Maeve and Homelander. 2 versus 4. Now what's interesting about these two is that they actually possess similar speed to I.M.P. With I.M.P being about Mach 12 in terms of combat and reaction speeds, with Queen Maeve and Homelander being around Mach 18. Not too big of a difference, although Queen Maeve and Homelander do have a slight edge. You could also argue that they are debatably faster, especially if you give Homelander's claims of flying into space, which would be high hypersonic instead of hypersonic plus. But also in terms of potency, both Homelander and Maeve do have I.M.P pretty beat. Not only does Homelander survive a multi-city block explosion, but Queen Maeve also no-souled city block level explosion. And considering she can harm Homelander, who survived a multi-city block level attack, meaning that both Queen Maeve and Homelander have a pretty big advantage against I.M.P in terms of speed and power. Also, I.M.P's weapons are likely not going to be able to do anything to them. They would most likely have to rely on close quarters combat. And from there I could almost see the two of them just picking off I.M.P one by one. Now it's quite possible that I.M.P, given the circumstances, could potentially send Queen Maeve or Homelander away, especially since Blitzo has just recently accessed a portal of his own, which was a gift given by Stolas, meaning that if they play their cards right, they could potentially trap Homelander, maybe even send him to hell. And given their coordination as a team, much better coordination compared to the Seven, it's definitely quite possible. Although it is a very specific scenario that might not happen. Now, because of this, I do see the Seven clutching out, unfortunately. Not to mention, Homelander even has a light-based attack, meaning he could just decide to laser through I.M.P. Now, if we go with the more generous ends for I.M.P, and if you think the small town level scaling is correct, then I.M.P would actually win, no problem. They would still be slightly slower than Homelander and Queen Maeve, but given their superior potency in that scenario, then it shouldn't really be a problem. However, if we're generous to the Seven, and do grant Homelander large town level scaling, if you do upscale him off of the Storm feat, and if you do think he's city level, then, I mean, what the heck is I.M.P supposed to do in that scenario? They just get one shot, so, yeah. But anyway, that'll be it for this video. Let me know what you guys thought. Is there anything I missed? Is there an important thing I failed to mention? Please do let me know. Overall, I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's any other matchup you think would be interesting and would like me to cover, do let me know. Anyway, with that, thank you guys for watching. Peace.